Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thank you all for joining. I have the honor today of sitting on the panel and just hosting two professionals in the security space with long histories here. So I'll just do some quick introductions and we'll hop right to it. Roland Cloutier, you've been in this business for many years and you've had experience leading both physical and cybersecurity teams across companies, large global organizations, EMC, ADP, TikTok, ByteDance. So a wealth of experience there. And Dale Hoke, you join us with a background in both Department of Defense as a practitioner, as well as being a practitioner across New York City Police Department, and then here in the private sector at RegScale. So we have some great experiences to call on from both of you, and I'm excited to jump right into it. So let's talk about just some quick background here of our 2026 State of the Continuous Controls Monitoring Survey. And to no surprise, AI and automation are receiving high marks as far as what people would like to do with their organizations. I don't think any of us are surprised by that fact, but so I am surprised by some of the things that are causing adoption to be slow. Some of the references are around talent gaps and challenges in implementation, and frankly, just ironically, the burden of the rapidly evolving regulatory landscape is actually holding back some of the automation that can be used to solve some of those problems. Because I think there's broad-based acceptance that continuous controls monitoring and automation can bring efficiencies to help address this changing regulatory landscape. So let's jump into this and we'll reference some of the findings from the studies, but specifically looking for your particular feedback from your experience. So Roland, I'm going to start with you. And as we look around the global landscape, 6 to 10 plus frameworks is quite common depending on size of org. And as we look at how organizations are addressing these challenges, can you share a little bit in your perspective and what you've seen personally and then through your observations with your peers?
Yeah, absolutely, Eric. And thanks for having me. This is one of my favorite areas because I think we often really pigeonhole this into compliance. And my theory on this, I'm sure we'll get to it later, that this is really about true operational controls capabilities and dynamically so for a global operation. But specific to your question, obviously there's a lot more compliance in cyber. There just is. We've seen it in the EU, we've seen it in the United States, we've seen it in jurisdiction by jurisdiction within the republic, state by state. If you want to operate in KSA or Saudi Arabia, or you want to operate, and sell into India or South America, especially Brazil, as well as an APJ. And I can just list all the countries in the last 3 or 4 years that have had these extensive new requirements. You're going to have to be compliant, or you can't operate. And so there's two parts of this. There's one that your business has a requirement that's regulatory assertive that they can't operate in those environments without this type of control proof capability, if you will. The second is they can't compete in those markets, right? So this is really the tip of the spear with your go-to-market organization being able to actually execute a sales strategy and a delivery within a market they may want to expand to. And the other thing potentially holding them up is us and our ability to show those jurisdictions that we're compliant. And that's just cyber. I mean, if you're a public company in the United States or around the world, you have, other potential issues. And it just used to be the SEC. And now we have the FTC getting involved, post major breaches that say, are you really doing what you're saying you're doing? We're going to evaluate what you're saying to the consumer. And so therefore, you have to be upholden to certain requirements there. So do you have certain controls in place? Can you prove those claims and those risks? And that's just what we do primarily. But we're also forgetting about the privacy controls enforcement aspect of this, right? So many new requirements on privacy, access to certain types of information, how we use that information. And sure, we have CPOs and entire privacy engineering organization these days, but the real question is, how do you prove it? And that comes down to cyber controls that often we're accountable for. So, you layer all these controls upon, or these control requirements upon certification and accreditations and attestations. Listen, you can't do this anymore in any real way manually. You have to introduce advanced automation capabilities that help you layer, resolve it, and achieve it at speed in these markets. So yeah, there's a lot going on right now in this space.
Yeah, well, you did as you go around the globe. I'm just trying to keep chart, and I've had conversations with large organizations where it's up in the multiple hundreds of requirements that they have, and you start thinking about that. Pretty sure their staff isn't scaling proportionately. So automation clearly is that, and I guess as a as part of the problem in that sense of we're the go-to-market engine. So we are continually coming to our teams and saying, we need this, we need that. But there's also a balance, which is the organization wants to provide good security and best practice and make sure that they're establishing trust with their customer and partner base. So Dale, maybe I'll move over to you because as we talk about regulatory agility, one of the study elements that I found interesting in the last 5 years, over 50% of resource for a large portion of the respondents was spent on new regulations that had come up in the last 5 years. And so when you think about that, and then you think about the fact that, continuous controls monitoring can help bring that assess once, leverage many agility to an organization. How are you doing that? And particularly, as a CISO of probably the smallest organization you've been with in your career, how do you think about resource management and continuous controls monitoring?
So when we start talking about small team, the small team reality and prioritization is when you're running a security team, particularly a small security team, automation isn't a nice to have. It's survival, right? It's absolutely how you stay ahead of it. And we start talking about opening new markets and how these things work. We're seeing a decided shift in moving from compliance, that checkbox that everybody used it for, and to showing cyber resiliency, right? You see a move in the market in 20x and various other with CRIs to show your security and getting compliance as a result of demonstrating your security. So you simply can't afford manual processes that have to be repeated every quarter or at every audit. Point in time is outdated. We're constantly asking ourselves whether something can be validated continuously instead of and proven repeatedly. The biggest risk for small teams isn't missing a control. It's burning out the people that's responsible for reporting on them, right? Or not being able to monitor control drift because they're distracted by some other manual process that you have going on, right? So automation and AI, and they're separate. I just want to make sure there's a line drawn, right? AI is one factor, automation is another, but both working together are critical, particularly as we see the markets change, right? People want to know right now how things are working. They want to know right now what the state of my enterprise environment is. And we can no longer go down that compliance checklist and show you evidence, right? We need to be grabbing that evidence right now, automating the input and using it dynamically, right, to get our control assurance.
Yeah, and I mean you've got an element of resource management, but also time in there, and time is money. And I like the title of this slide of time, money, risk, because you can't talk about those three things without immediately thinking about prioritization and trade-offs. And one of the comments in the study that really struck me was that organizations are making these trade-offs where just because of the challenges that you just mentioned, Dale, they're foregoing critical activities like risk assessments and control tests. And frankly, you got to ask yourself, well, wait, could we get some of that time back and redeploy resources on things with higher return? So Roland, I'll look to you about, this is a little bit of the cobbler's children have no shoes. I'm too busy to help myself. I'm stuck in an audit loop type problem. So how do you go about, as a professional here, how do you go about breaking out of that I'm too busy to help myself challenge?
Yeah, there's so many components to that. So let's break it down. Why did this start, right? And the first was CISOs were being held accountable for regulatory incidents or issues assigned to these regulatory entities that could potentially go after them civilly or criminally. And in the organizations and boards were risk adverse to those things happening to the company itself. So people really focused on this. And then what happened was you had this well, we're already paying within organizations to be protected. This should be an output of that. And the reality is the complexity associated with evidence collection, before a CCM-like capability came to be, it was human intensive, spreadsheets. And even if we created our own applications in SharePoint or we use a third-party GRC to be the basis by which we collected, there was still a lot of work, cross-mapping, then issuing independent reports that, all of these entities required, albeit some of these controls were the same. But getting back to your question is we got away from mission-focused capabilities, right? What am I here to do? Defend, protect, enable. And so when we aren't able to articulate a good defense capability associated with a compliance area, you end up getting this bifurcation. But I don't see it as one or the other. I mean, at the end of the day, as an operational executive looking at the things I've committed to from a control perspective, I should be looking at those every day, not when my PCI report comes up or, a requirement for a federal financial report or a SEC public, my Qs or Ks. I literally have to be doing this on a day-to-day basis to know that I said my data center in India was going to have certain controls protecting Southwest Asia. If I'm looking at it in the morning and it's not there, I have problems. So you really have to marry those two and think of mission first, but enablement through active collection of information to understand your current control capabilities. That in itself will be a downstream output to reports and controls and certification and accreditation. And it really, to Dale's point, if you do this operationally correct, then you automatically become compliant in your reporting capabilities. And I know there's a big gap there, and there are certain things that you may not see on the documentation side or partners within your organization in technology or operations that you have to collect certain things from. But the reality is a lot of that stuff can be automated to the point of verification validation only in report issuance. And you can get back to not only focusing on mission, but having a better clarity, a better understanding, and better focus of defense and operations now.
Well, and just to pull that one notch further, if you look at the lens of or the scope of the people that are impacted, control owners are often well outside sort of this cyber silo. And they're getting dragged into the multiple framework fatigue as well.
Oh, I mean, I feel for my engineering partners. I really do. First, we have to have SDLC in place to make sure we have good quality product or code that we're doing for whatever our business operation or agency does. But we're also making them compliant to certain standards, and whether it's SBOMs or it's required in different jurisdictions. So now I have engineers that are geared and built to build really cool stuff at speed in process, as technology is changing. And we're making them spend up to 20% of their time doing really manual, crazy stuff that's taking away from our ability to really dynamically change our products or our capabilities at market, right? And so this is why we built privacy by design. This is why we instrumented CCM and CCMA to take that off them. I mean, and that's just one area. I can give you like 5 other areas, but that is, we're critically impacting our partners' ability to do their mission space because we're trying to accomplish, what's been given to us as a compliance initiative. This solves so many issues around the organization, reduces political stress internally, and makes really, really happy clients when you get this right.
Eric,
Yeah, I think,
you mind if I add something there?
please.
So I love everything that Roland said, right? And I've done this two ways. I've done in the pipeline, right, where you're compliance focused, and I've done when you're in the pipeline where you're engineering focused. And only one of those scales, right? Compliance was never designed to scale, engineering scales. So when you start laying over compliance as code, policy as code, and scaling in your SSDLC, right, your secure software delivery lifecycle, and you start to uh, gather that automatically and and getting compliance as a result, that's where you see real value, right? So, and I just kind of wanted to shine that point over top of everything that Roland said. So, thanks for bringing that up, Roland. And Eric, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, they keep going. I mean, I think this is a lot of the meat of what the outcomes need to be. I mean, at the end of the day, we're here to deliver goods and services, whatever our mission is of our organization. But Roland, you've said it very well around what responsibility that brings with it. So let's pull the thread a little more on those comments that are or the feedback that we're seeing about what's holding back adoption. So why are organizations not just rolling forward if the top line answer is yes, more automation, please?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, I have opinions, but I think every organization is a little bit different. There's a skill set issue, right? When we began this industry and we built our perfect organizations and we had, engineering and operations and threat management and incident management and on and on and on, we built compliance organizations based on the capabilities that the market had at the time and the type of people that we brought in. And so GRC was important, still is important, in understanding how we collect information on risk and give output of our existing control environments. But when controls became that much important operationally, and when controls have now become that much more dynamic in our ability to operate as a company, we didn't grow that organization appropriately or the skill sets needed in those organizations. So oftentimes we're trying to make a leapfrog jump from GRC and semi-operations to fully autonomous CCMA or CCM with automated control and evidence collection across multiple business units and lines. It's a very different animal. And so often it falls to skill sets in understanding what it will take to get there. I think that's number one. Number two is failing to see the operational objective therein controls, right? When we put it aside as yet additional investments only for compliance, we're missing the beauty that is CCMA, which is ensuring what my current existing and operational defense posture is to protect the business. That's worth investment. And so it becomes a chicken or egg in many people's minds. And until they link that it's the whole omelet and chicken dinner, like they often uh, are trying to reduce the spend and additional compliance requirements that in many people's minds should be going into other areas that are requiring the compliance. CCMA, to my perspective, should be a service that we give as part of our operational excellence, and therefore becomes a priority and primary pillar within our security operations and engineering functions.
Yeah, I like that. I like the focus around this operational excellence too. And Dale, maybe you pull this thread a little bit, and you guys get a little back and forth on this one, because there are still a lot of industries that are heavily audit driven, and for good reason, sometimes, and maybe not always. But I look at this stat on this slide of 84% of organizations are seeing significant reduction in audit prep time. Talk a little bit about what that means and how you make that a reality, because that feels like something everybody should be doing.
I totally agree. And it really starts with planning, right? So understanding, right, what your requirements are and then planning to automate them before the next audit cycle, right? So a lot of people have become really comfortable with the manual processes because they know them. They're well published. It's a rhythm in which they fall into. So they don't have to at the risk of sounding a little jerkish, they don't have to really think, they just have to do, right? And some of these organizations or some of these regulatory frameworks, they're afraid to fall out of compliance, right? Because if you fall out of compliance, then you close that door to the market, right? So um, automating requires a change in your thought process, and you have to experience it small first and then expand. So my recommendation is get started somewhere, find out where you're having operational problems or you need to gain operational efficiencies, and automate small. Maybe it's in your account management review, so automate some of your account requests, and then through that automation do your account reviews, and then on the back end of that, you should be collecting that evidence automatically, and then be able to evaluate the how it would benefit you in the audit cycle. So I think organizations really run into problems when they try to eat the whole elephant at one time, right? You have to slice it up and prepare it properly and then bring it in and make changes efficiently. And I think I think that's just one of many examples. So with that, I'm going to kick that over to Roll, and I'm interested in his take because I know he's been through this as much as I have.
Yeah, and down 98.3% of the time, you and I agree. I've known you for some time, and I have a different approach, and size of maturity matters here. So let's not pretend it doesn't. But I think that if you're a mid-size enterprise to an MNC to a multi-global, I think you take a different approach. The same way that we had to rip the Band-Aid off from SDLC and jump into, secure by design and privacy by design, which changed our hearts and minds and our controls and capabilities and what we controlled and what engineering controlled. Like that was a big jump. That was a leapfrog. I think organizations have to think about it differently. I think instead of doing compliance, then moving over to operational assurance, that you start an entirely new service that says, I am going to ensure my controls are up and operating. I'm going to create an automated an AI-enabled service that is going to collect information without the necessary for interrupting my partners in engineering and in other areas. And I am going to provide that as a data service on the back end to automatically construct and issue continuous certification and accreditations to whatever regulatory authority globally that I'm there that I have to adhere to, and I'm going to do it in one foul swoop. I think in this space, ripping off the Band-Aid is the best way to do it in the concept and thinking of creating a new service. It's like cloud. People had pain until they said, I'm going to create our own team. They're going to be cloud engineers, they're going to be cloud operations, they're going to be cloud remediation management, and they're going to support IR in the critical incident response center in our cloud ops. Great. That solved the pain. We were able to grow and drive, and migrate over to cloud a lot faster, a lot easier, with a lot less pain. I think in the AI space, companies that are doing it well have said, I'm going to create AI security engineers. We're going to get into AI pipeline defense segmentation and management. And we're going to have teams that's going to specialize on that. Until that, we had people that were going to school to get their, SANS 101 course in AI, but we weren't hiring PhDs and or data experts into our security organizations. Now you see these mature organizations that have built those and are off to the races with an understanding of how to do pipeline defense, data defense, and access assurance in AI. It's the same here, right? I think we have to rip the Band-Aid off in mid to larger size organizations and just recreate what this really is.
Dale, you want to follow up any comments there, or you want me to give you a nice transition out?
No, so Roland is not wrong, right? This is and I think it is dependent on the vertical of your industry, right? So, if you can at scale rip the band-aid and run, I think that that's a great way to go. And if you can do that safely and responsibly, I support it, right? Because it's the better way to do it. I find that most CISOs take a little bit of a cautious approach because of in a lot of these and as Roland said earlier, right, in a lot of these markets, right, compliance is the driven focus, not necessarily the business enabler. And a lot of these facts, compliance isn't something that CISOs love to do, right? They want to enable the business, and to the board, it means something entirely different. So if you can rip the band-aid and run with it and you have that support, I think that's the way to go. I find that most companies have an appetite that's a little smaller for that. But I think there's room for both. And and I think really if you have the room, I think Roland's approach is probably a smarter way because you can build a separate service from the base up, makes the foundation smarter.
And I will cap it with this. Not that I'm going back and forth with Dale here, but
That's entirely okay.
think of the costs, right? Like
Mhm.
the cost it's going to take to run two parallel capabilities over an extended amount of time because we can't transition, right? Like just do the math. Have your financial geniuses and partners from the CFO's office that sit with you say, okay, if we spend a little bit more OpEx up front and we do this in 12 months, right? Use round numbers, in less than a year. We make this transition, we bring in partners, we scale, we create the architecture, we create the automation, we train our people now to be doing this, and in a year from now, we're on one platform instead of being on this platform where we're trying to build this, we're confusing our partners, and we still have two teams and two separate operations and two OpEx on two different platforms and on and on and on. How much is that going to cost, right? It's a better financial decision. It's a better business decision from the lens of being a security business executive. So think about that too.
Well, I think I want to play on things you both said here. We look at cost, we look at speed, and as we dive into the survey a bit, we've got this title, AI and CCM are a force multiplier. I mean, AI is all about speed, of course, but speed in the wrong direction or speed based on bad data gives you bad decisions. So how do you get better data? And we look at having data being current and don't have to worry about the timeliness and freshness problem and get data from more sources more often. So that feels like the way that you can help really eliminate some of that variability and potential risk of the AI. But where do you two fall down? I mean, Roland, you've spent a long time managing risk. So talk a little more about AI and how you see AI and CCM coming together.
Yeah, I get this all the time. People think like I'm like whoa on AI. I'm a big believer in AI. I am. Listen, is it immature from a controls perspective? Sure, but wasn't cloud? Understanding and having the right people in your organization to make appropriate risk decisions based on your business is great. But like in this area, come on, it's data collection, analysis, risk modeling, and execution. So this is a no-brainer for automation, and I love it in being able to really deep dive into the data assets to come up with linkages across all of my controls. I like to be able to understand risks we haven't been able to understand because we haven't been able to go across all the data and come across some of these interesting findings. And the new technology in the space is absolutely fantastic, from IR and SecOps to threat management to compliance, being able to tie a control to an issue to a management, to a report is never been better. So I'm a big believer in this space. I'm excited to see the amount of investment going in right now to this world. I think that if CISOs, my peers, are not saying, here are the top 10 things I'm doing to be a better security and business executive in the next year, they're going to be way behind and their businesses are going to be questioning them. So I encourage everybody in our seats to take a sit back, a step back and really think about not just how I'm going to enable AI, it's how I'm going to use it to be better at what I do, better at how I protect the business and being a better business leader.
Yeah, spot on. And I think this is one you and Dale will absolutely sing from the same hymnal on. With Dale, you've used it a bunch in your role, and you talk about it a lot. Share a little bit of kind of where you see some of the low-hanging fruit and where you want it to go.
I mean, I think AI, I think that we're starting to see a shift in how we use AI with a little bit more responsibility, right? So I think at first we were kids running with scissors. I think because we were excited, and then we started to think, how do I use it responsibly? And how do I use it deliberately? Because the use of AI changes. And if you're a software company using AI, you got to understand that when you make those changes, if there's a mistake, the blast radius is instant and widespread, right? So the responsible building and use of AI is what I preach. I love AI, and I love it. I love it and use it very deliberately, right? Not as an autonomous decision maker, but as an acceleration layer. It helps with the correlation, summarization, and pattern recognition. When I say that, I have, and I'd say everybody has policies, that are just all over the place, right? Falling out the ears. So I can now extract the data from those policies, use the policy statements that are already captured and written to write my control statements, and then use AI in conjunction with automation to figure out where the evidence is, what the right evidence is, and to layer it across my controls, right? And that is the real value of AI. It's not replacing humans. It's taking all the work that they stack up on top of humans that nobody has time for anymore, and doing it more deliberately and faster, and enabling humans to make a better risk-based decision. Where I want to see AI go next is help reducing noise and highlight what actually deserves execution attention. I see a control drift over here, Mr. Human. Go take a look at it, and here's what I think the impact is. Here's the real value is shortening the time between identifying risk and making an informed decision about it, and then knocking down the silos and notifying everybody simultaneously. Bringing everybody into one view of a control and everybody making a good risk-based decision based off of inputs that have been validated and all the garbage removed. I think that's where the real value is, and I think that using the AI to evaluate your packages to help with what an audit should be versus what it is, and to get you the differential statements faster. That's how we used it. That's how we accelerated three of our packages that we've used, and that's where I think the real value is. Right. So we just need to be better at making evidence easier to find and maintain using AI, in my opinion.
I mean, Dale, I owe you a security hub, man. That was great. That was, I, the only thing I think I could add to that is I think why are we even writing our own, control statements?
Right.
Why not allow AI based on the evidence, our capabilities, and our technologies and the knowledge that it will have more broadly, create a more reasonable, clear-cut, direct statement that makes sense for our organizations. And the other thing you said around doing some of this work in a shorter time, from my perspective, is every damn day. And whether I'm a control owner or I'm the CISO or CSO that's required to review the assurance level broadly across my defensive and response posture, I want to know that on a daily basis. not going from once every 6 months or once a year to once a month or maybe a report once a week, every day. Like that becomes a part of our evolution and our operational flow. So yeah, and I don't think we can do it without the automation, the AI assist.
Yeah, I fully agree with that, particularly with the pace of regulatory change, but also the sprawl of tech, and just look at the stacks and the ephemeral sprawl, and it's just massive. So makes good sense to me. I think you've both talked a lot about efficiency, but if we go back a couple of slides, we were talking about that trade-off and kind of prioritization that has to be made, and cost is one of those. So got to talk about ROI. Dale, you're a big fan of efficiency. You're always looking to answer the question, but is this really worth the investment? So can you share a little bit with us when you start thinking about what you're going to have to, who you're going to have to answer to, kind of board level and fiduciary responsibility? How are you looking at ROI and investment in and around the topics that we're talking about here, particularly with control monitoring?
Well, when you break it down, boards don't really care about frameworks or compliance. They care about confidence, right? And I think one of my responsibilities is to translate security and compliance work into the outcomes the business understands, which is reduced risk exposure, faster deal cycles, and fewer surprises, which no board likes, right? So surprise, we've had a breach. Surprise, we've had some answer. No, that's nothing good, right? If I bring that to my board, right, I'm not going to be a CISO for very long. So, how do I help the company get to yes while maintaining my cyber resiliency and reporting on it in a responsible manner? That's really what my job is. And the idea here is visibility only matters if it's actionable. If I can't clearly explain why we're investing in something and what risk it mitigates, then I haven't done my job as a CISO. So when we start talking about CCM, the real investment of CCM and the utilization of AI around CCM is to reduce visibility gaps, right? Monitor the change and then report on that change and then show the board the value that you're getting from this automation because it's not cheap, right? It takes time to build, it takes resources, but once you get it rolling and you sustain it, the back end of that is you scale more effectively, and you have a better visibility on your change management, you have better visibility on your security posture, and you have better overall risk visibility across every aspect of your enterprise network.
Yeah, for sure. And Roland, this you mentioned a couple of elements earlier that I want to bring you back to, and I credit you with coining that phrase of dynamic operational control assurance. And I love how you've laid out sort of in prior discussions, sort of what that means to you and the audiences that you have to serve, from internal to external stakeholders. Talk a little bit more, because where Dale's talking about the efficiencies, there's also an assurance quality lens that I know that's a drum you beat on. So pull that thread for us, please.
Yeah, first I want to finish Dale's because he had a great point. I mean, there's just some efficiencies and understanding the why and how you articulate. The boards are interested. The boards have a job, and that job is ensure that management is capable and are doing the job to manage the business. And your portion of that within security, risk, and privacy, is important to them. But also is how you manage those dollars. And what's interesting is controls, controls, controls. And we have these freaking controls in place for years, and almost nobody is able to go back and say, why did we do that? What was the original project for? Is there an existing risk? Do we have an existing threat? And that just in how you define what a control is for cyber defensive operations is part is does that still exist? Can I use this technology to figure out ways to reduce certain control stacks to be able to refocus those funds on gap areas we have? I mean, that is just one additional thing based on what Dale was saying that actually gets me really excited. I would rather have someone come and challenge me, one of my directs saying, Roland, we don't need that anymore. Chief, let's get rid of it. We don't, there's none of this, there's none of this. Here's the evidence associated with that. Let's reinvest in these gap areas. That's smart. Now, when it gets to, what I called dynamic operation controls assurance, and Gartner hasn't, used it yet, so no one's going to use it. But that is the ability to apply a CCM framework across the entirety of your controls commitment stack that you're accountable for. And it's for two reasons. We mentioned, or Dale mentioned, visibility. You can't defend what you can't see. You can't assure what you can't see. You can't see it if you're not collecting the information on it and looking at it every damn day. So how do you get to a point where you understand how you're defending your environment, what your capabilities are, and what you're doing, and being able to re-articulate that back to the board? Scariest question I ever got from any board in my life came from a 36-year-old board member, wonder genius, that sat on a very old stellar public board. And I was talking about, we got that, we have these controls in place. And his one question I'll never forget ever in my life is, how do you know? And I said, excuse me, because how do you know that's true? And I'm like, well, we collect this. So do you have automatic, data collection things for that? I'm like, how do you know? And I said, I'm going to have to get back with you on actually how I know 100%. And that has always come back to this whole idea about dynamic operational controls, is how do you do this on a consistent, ongoing basis to be able to show our capabilities, make sure your investments are in the right place, and make sure you're not lacking in what you've committed to the business, to the market, to the clients.
Yeah, say what you're going to do, be able to do it, and then be able to validate it. That makes good sense to me.
Yep.
Well, this has been some really good dialogue. I want to try to wrap up so that we have time to get to the Q&A. And I think just in summary here, as we look to the future of GRC and kind of 2026 and beyond, clearly the survey respondents believe, and you both believe, that automation plays a big role here. No doubt about that. Continuous control monitoring moves from point in time to continuous assurance. I think that's been pretty widely accepted. Love to hear some other thoughts about, but how do we do it? How do we keep up with the tech stack? Kind of what's the future from your perspective? And then we'll roll into some Q&A from the audience here. Dale, why don't you kick us off, and then we'll wrap up with Roland.
Sure. So, I mean, really, the future of GRC is continuous, right? It's not episodic. Because of the way the technology has changed, right, we can no longer do these point in time assessments, right? Automation and compliance as code allows assurance to move at the speed of engineering instead of at the speed of the audit cycle at a predetermined, because nothing is predetermined anymore. Right? You can't just say, well, I'm going to evaluate these controls for this period of time. The controls are changing, or I'm sorry, your environment is changing every day, and your controls are static, right? So until you make yourself dynamic, right? And I think Roland summarized it in his last statement, so I'm not going to beat on it. Until you make it visible, right? Until you start knocking down silos and you make it dynamic, you're stuck in this point in time life cycle. We got to get out of that. It's got to be a continuous life cycle. Success won't be measured by how many audits you pass. For any CISOs, it's going to be measured by how few surprises you deliver and how much trust that your customers have in you as a software company, right? I think the CISOs will own the majority of that, operationally speaking. And I really think that when it's done right, security and compliance doesn't slow innovation. They make it safe to scale, right? And at the end of that, you get a good picture of cyber resiliency, which is where trust is built, right? And it's all about trust and making customers trust you. And that's kind of where I see the future of GRC is change our thought process and embrace it, because it's coming.
All right. So everything Dale said, and food for thought. Food for thought. Dale mentioned compliance as code gets you to where you need to be, but there's an important reason why. Because machine-generated code, machine-generated services, machine-generated businesses, that you are accountable for protecting can no longer be managed in the ways of the Rainbow series and an auditor's world focus on reporting. We have to develop our capabilities, our defensive posture, our responsive posture, our ability to understand insights within the environment we're defending and the control environment at the speed of the technology we're defending. And the only way to do that is through assurances code and through driving automation into CCMA and dynamic controls assurance. It's the only way for us to be able to see that, or we're going to get buried so fast it'll take you more years to get out of it than you're going to have left in your career. So remember, you're competing with the automation that your business and your technology partners have already invested and started driving to. So rip that Band-Aid off. And I don't care if you're a small organization or you're a global multinational, you figure out what the rip is, what that Band-Aid looks like, and you make that evolutionary jump to get away from old ways that simply are not going to stand still or stand the test of time in probably under 24 months. The world is changing that fast. You will not be able to keep up. So embrace the automation and embrace a net new capability to defend operationally and report regulatorily.
Yeah, that's an unbelievable segue. If I look at some of the questions that have come in from the audience, there was a question about the target market and specifically saying for what's the target market for this discussion? And is it mid to large organizations only, or can smaller firms rip off the Band-Aid? And I think, Roland, you just made the statement that says you got to decide what your rip is, but everybody can do it. And I think I would just add one context, which is just everybody has problems and priorities. So you just have to decide, well, wait a minute, where can I get the best return through automation? And but I would have to agree with you. From my experience doing this 20 plus years, everybody can rip a Band-Aid off. You just think about it and make that right move. Another question here from the audience. So we talked earlier, Roland, I think it was you that said that allowing AI to write your control statements, and why wouldn't you just why would any human spend time writing it? So there's a question out there that says, but if you allow AI to write your control statements and requirements, and then when you get your evidence, how do auditors respond to if the statement was written by AI and the evidence was gathered by AI is the question.
Yeah, I mean, there has to be a human in the loop. Don't get me wrong. And we have to validate the capabilities. Essentially, that control statement will have very specific elements of control feasibility and evidential requirements, right? And so they'll be written as the control, the element, the evidential requirements, right? Like basic standard stuff that we all do today. Those then will be tagged for a collection methodology and a pipeline to be able to go out to a certain data source to collect it. And so they're going to be able to see the traceability easier than, well, I got this report from Sally over in finance and I got this from Jimmy over in IT. And you just go through this stack, and that's for that control, right? Like they're going to see the collection, the when, the how, the reasonability, and the evidence in a more succinct capability through the output. It typically is how you're going to see it.
Yep,
if I could add to that, Eric, having gone through a number of auditors, or having go through a number of audits with different auditors and having used AI a few times, no auditor is going to accept AI as evidence. They're going to ask the humans what they found and where to find it, right? You're not going to be able to bring AI in and ask the AI a question while the auditor is there, right? So that's just not something you're going to be able to do. So while your AI removes all of the, or a large amount of the admin, right? It's still incumbent upon the humans, the control owners, the ISSMs, ISSOs, to compile the data and deliver it as the regulatory requirement defines it, right? AI will make it super easy to do so, but it doesn't accept risk. It doesn't validate. unless you tell it to validate. It can't quantify the evidence. Humans can quantify the evidence. So let's recognize what AI actually is. It's not friend, it's not foe, it's a tool, right? So how you deploy and use that tool in your environment makes a difference. So, and the same thing goes with compliance in your GRC tool. How you choose to use that tool and apply it to your GRC program will make a difference come audit time.
Fair enough. We got a couple other questions coming in through here. Dale, there's one specific question for government work with one GRC person on the contract. What would you suggest? Investing in CNAP or a CCM solution?
So that's an interesting question. And I'm going to counter that with another question. What's your pain point? What's the contract telling you? Right? Because there's no easy answer to that. And I'm going to say that the best answer is both because they work together to give you the best outcome, right? A CNAP is going to tell you what's going on in your cloud, where your assets are, spins up, spins down, all of those things, right? And the CCM solution is going to gather the evidence and put it in a presentable format that is best represents your GRC program. If you are limited to one or the other, then it depends on what your contract is telling you, right? So I'm a little leery on answering that question outright, but I would say that I use both together to get the best outcomes. But in your particular use case, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to conversate or have a conversation around either over LinkedIn or via email around what your specific use case is, and then we'll help you find what yes is for your organization.
Great. Couple more questions out here. One is how do you use generative AI to prepare reports using your data that might be restricted by classification, and you're trying to avoid getting exposed to the public? And then there's a specific question around, does Copilot have the feature to keep that? So I'm not sure if you know about the Copilot answer, but thoughts on confidentiality and classified.
I can give my 2 cents, but Dale's probably got a lot more experience in here. Essentially, it depends if you're what environment you're operating in. But if your systems are already operating in a FedRAMP-like environment, simply expand your CCMN capability in use in the FedRAMP environment to whatever appropriate level of classification. With regards to Copilot, you can get Copilot in secure implementations for classification. Again, those are FedRAMP. Some other duck if you're actually operating on the agency's platforms. Yeah, there's a couple ways to do that. Dale, I don't know if you have more prescriptive look at that.
I do. So if you take a look at your services offering, and wherever you're operating, say you're in Azure, you're operating FedRAMP High in Azure Commercial, right? Then the services operating will let you know if you can use Copilot if it's there, right? I personally say validate your services first, right? Be cautious. This is where you want to be super careful. And then if you can, we're able to use the AI services that are provided on-prem for those really classified environments. You're seeing more and more on-prem solutions that enable you to do what you need to do. So I would say first, check the services and where you're operating. Second, verify it with your ISSM. Get the go ahead before you go ahead and reach into that. But Microsoft's Copilot does have things that operate in the GSS high or in the FedRAMP high flavors. So, but be very cautious, right? I'm always before I look twice before I do anything around AI if there's sensitivity involved.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We have one last question for around AI in particular. And can you share any perspective about known vulnerabilities and if it's not vulnerabilities, then just maybe we'll just hone it in on risks of AI being used today?
Yeah, there's a bunch. I mean, Dale was answering a question on CNAP a few minutes ago. I mean, you understand it works. So AI works essentially on the existing stack that you're familiar with, a cloud platform, a networking pipeline, data pipelines, data sources. It has certain workbooks and obviously algorithmic technology functionality that's a little bit different. The best way for you to approach this is based on the type of AI you and your organization are using, whether it's internal or third party. Use something like MITRE Atlas. I mean, it's probably the easiest way. Most of us are already very familiar with, attack frameworks, from MITRE. Atlas is the one that they have for AI. NIST has a current operating risk functionality, AI risk functionality that you can follow and implement in your existing GRC processes or risk processes. And from an operational standpoint, being able to understand the infrastructure that it's on, the pipelines that are operating, the data sources, you can think of it as a micro segmentation view of those operating environments and make them their own classification within your GVA, your Global Vulnerability Assessment Platform. I think that's the simple answer to address it. The other is there is technology coming out. There's 3 or 4 great technologies out there that enable you to look through your source code. It will tell you exactly where your AI is, exactly what AI you're using, exactly what third-party AI is implemented into your existing software constructs, and then allow you to go and assess the LLMs or assess the technology that's being used, especially if they're open source, and then tells you which controls to put in your own code to defend against those new problems. And that's available today, folks. That's not like magic juju sauce, coming out next year to some small startup near you. That is available, today from products like Cranium and others. So just think about how you use it and what's most important. I'm an operational guy, so I say go find your stuff first, segment it, understand your existing problems on the infrastructure, and then go apply an AI view to it under either a MITRE or NIST view, and then accelerate your vulnerability management there.
Your closing statement was perfect, Roland, because I was going right into that. Your AI, it's all around data, right? So what the vulnerabilities are, start with your data, find out where the data lives, make sure you know how things are being trained. And that's where your trust also starts, right? Because if you're selling a piece of software to a customer and you can't explain your modeling, how it's updated, and where your data lives, that's going to be a real problem. And I said it earlier, and it bears repeating. The risks around AI are exponentially more terrible when you make a mistake. So it's very important to understand, where your data is, how it's being managed, because if you make a mistake in a pipeline using that is using AI, it's instantaneous problem, right? You damage a lot of things through a lot of data layers. So that's the real vulnerability there, is not knowing where your data lives, to Roland's point. So make sure you know where it is and make sure you understand how your LLMs are working. And then the last part of it is continuously monitor it. It has to have all of the rules around it, review your logs, do the proper security around it, right, in order to maintain your data feasibility.
Great. Thank you. We got time for probably a quick 60-second answer here on the last question, and we'll get ourselves wrapped up. But it is a little bit around data location. So if you're starting the move to GRC, what's the first step in getting going when you want to layer in CCM? So the question is specifically, do we need to move all of our data to a central location and then move directives to another and then let the CCM begin? Or how do I start to bring CCM into my GRC program?
All right, Dale, you got this one. I have my own opinion, but it's not professionally insightful, so I'll let you do it.
Okay, so I'm going to start with essentially what we just talked about with AI. Where's your data and evidence live? And then how do you build the integrations to put it in one place, right? Because that's the whole idea around starting your GRC process. So understand where your data is, start to map out your evidence of where it is, right? And you're going to find that it's disparate. So centralize it and then start to integrate it. And how you integrate it doesn't matter, right? It really is. You could do a bunch of different ways. The idea is get it in one place, integrate it into a GRC platform of your choosing, and then start to correlate that data so that it starts to take on a life of its own, and you have it all into. And people yell at me about this, but I love this term: single pane of glass. I know Roland hates it, but one place by which all things live.
Yeah, very good. And I think the last piece on that is a CCM platform helps you leave your data where it is and create that centralization for you. But
Yes,
with
sir.
that said, I want to give a big thanks to all the audience that spent your time with us today. Thank you for your questions and participation. And then, of course, a huge thank you to both Dale and Roland for your time and for the team for pulling together the report. Download it here, get your copy. Please participate next year. And we hope this is helpful. Thank you all.